Imagine a world suddenly gripped by terror, where shadows on the horizon could mean the end of everything you knew. For 3 centuries, one name struck fear into the hearts of empires: Viking. This is the story of an age defined by those who sailed beyond the known world, transforming Europe and leaving an indelible mark on history, the entire history of the Viking Age. To truly understand this transformative era, we must first confront the myths. Far from being a monolithic horde of bloodthirsty barbarians adorned with horned helmets, the people we call Vikings were complex societies of skilled farmers, accomplished artisans, shrewd traders, sophisticated poets, and innovative lawmakers. They were not a singular ethnic group, but rather diverse Norse peoples hailing from what is today Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Their expansion, often brutal and sudden, was rooted in a confluence of factors that had been simmering for centuries. Life in pre-Viking Age Scandinavia was harsh, dictated by the unforgiving northern climate and rugged landscapes. Small, often warring chieftains and kings vied for power, their societies built upon a foundation of clan loyalty, honor, and a deep connection to their pagan gods. Archaeological evidence reveals a population with a growing appetite for wealth, prestige, and land, coupled with advancements in shipbuilding and navigation that would soon redefine their world. For generations, these Norse peoples had engaged in local trade, fishing, and farming, but the late 8th century marked a profound shift. The catalyst for this seismic change is often pinpointed to a single, infamous event: the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne. On June 8, 793 AD, a small fleet of longships appeared off the coast of Northumbria, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the waves. The attack on the Holy Island, a revered center of Christian learning and wealth, was unprecedented. Monks unprepared for violence were slaughtered or enslaved, precious relics plundered, and the sanctuary desecrated. The shockwaves reverberated across Christian Europe. Alcuin of York, a prominent scholar, wrote of the unprecedented horror. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain, as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar, and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the street. This was no mere banditry. It was an assault on the very symbols of faith and civilization, heralding the beginning of an era of unprecedented expansion and terror. The initial raids, though devastating, were relatively small-scale hit-and-run operations, typically occurring in the summer months when the seas were calmer. Monasteries and coastal settlements were prime targets, rich in portable wealth like silver, gold, and fine textiles, yet often poorly defended. The motivations behind these early forays were manifold. Population pressures in Scandinavia may have played a role, driving younger sons and ambitious chieftains to seek new opportunities abroad. The allure of easily acquired wealth, coupled with a desire for prestige and the acquisition of slaves, proved a powerful draw. Furthermore, the political landscape of Europe offered tempting vulnerabilities. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England were fragmented, and the emerging Carolingian Empire was vast but susceptible to coastal incursions. Central to the Viking phenomenon was their unparalleled mastery of shipbuilding. The longship was a revolutionary piece of technology shallow-drafted, capable of navigating both the open ocean and shallow rivers, fast and remarkably stable. Its clinker-built hull, overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets, made it strong yet flexible, able to withstand the brutal North Atlantic. Powered by both sail and oar, these vessels allowed the Norse to strike with terrifying speed and disappear just as quickly, making them virtually unstoppable in the early stages of the Viking Age. As the 9th century progressed, the scale and ambition of Viking activities grew. seasonal raids evolved into organized campaigns, with increasing numbers of ships and warriors. Rather than simply plundering and returning home, Vikings began to overwinter in conquered territories, establishing temporary camps that slowly morphed into permanent settlements. Dublin, for instance, founded in 841 AD by Norse settlers, quickly became a thriving Viking port and a crucial hub in their expanding trade networks. It was a clear demonstration that the Vikings were not just raiders, but also shrewd merchants, establishing vast trading routes that stretched from the Baltic to Byzantium, exchanging furs, amber, and slaves for silver, silks, and spices. However, the true turning point, signaling a shift from opportunistic raiding to full-scale conquest, arrived in the mid-9th century with the emergence of the Great Heathen Army. This was not a unified force under a single monarch, but a coalition of powerful Viking leaders and their followers, coalescing from various Scandinavian regions with a common goal: to conquer and settle lands in England. Landing in East Anglia in 865 AD, this formidable force, led by figures such as Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba, began a systematic campaign of conquest that would dismantle several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. East Anglia quickly succumbed, followed by Northumbria and Mercia. York, a strategic Roman city, fell in 866 AD and became the Viking stronghold of Jorvik, a vibrant Norse city at the heart of their new territories. The Great Heathen Army's arrival fundamentally altered the geopolitical map of England, transforming the nature of Viking interaction from fleeting terror to enduring occupation, setting the stage for a prolonged struggle for dominance that would define the next century. The very fabric of Anglo-Saxon society was under siege, their kings fighting for survival against an enemy that no longer just stole their wealth, but sought to claim their very land and destiny. The relentless tide of Viking conquest threatened to engulf all of Anglo-Saxon England. With Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia dismantled or subjugated, only the southern kingdom of Wessex remained a bulwark against complete Norse domination. Its fate, and perhaps the future of England itself, now rested on the shoulders of one man, Alfred, who would later be known as Alfred the Great. When Alfred ascended to the throne in 871 AD, he inherited a kingdom in crisis. The Great Heathen Army, having ravaged the North and Midlands, turned its formidable attention south, launching a series of devastating campaigns against Wessex. For years, Alfred was forced into a desperate guerrilla-style resistance, operating from the marshes of Athelney, a remote stronghold in Somerset. His kingdom was on the verge of collapse, his people demoralized, and his resources dwindling. This period of intense hardship forged Alfred's resolve, transforming him from a beleaguered monarch into a strategic visionary. He understood that to merely repel the Vikings was not enough. Their military strength and capacity for rapid deployment demanded a fundamental restructuring of Anglo-Saxon defenses. Alfred initiated a series of radical reforms, laying the groundwork for a more resilient and unified defense. Recognizing the vulnerability of scattered settlements, he established a network of fortified burhs, strategic strongholds designed to protect the populace, provide a refuge for soldiers, and control key trade routes and defensive positions. These burhs, often built on existing Roman fortifications or strategically chosen hills, were more than just castles. They were nascent towns, centers of administration, trade, and military readiness. Each burh was garrisoned and maintained by local landowners, a system that ensured a constant supply of trained soldiers and resources, allowing Alfred to field a standing army that could respond quickly to Viking incursions, rather than relying solely on the traditional, less reliable Anglo-Saxon field. a levy of free men. Beyond military innovations, Alfred sought to revitalize Anglo-Saxon culture and learning, believing that a strong kingdom required not just military might, but also intellectual and spiritual strength. He famously championed education, translating important Latin works into Old English, promoting literacy, and inviting scholars to his court, thereby safeguarding and cultivating the very heritage the Vikings sought to dismantle. The culmination of Alfred's struggle came in 878 AD with the pivotal Battle of Edington. After a surprise Viking attack during the winter of 877 to 878 that forced Alfred into hiding, he emerged in the spring, gathering his forces and confronting the Viking army under the leadership of Guthrum. The Anglo-Saxons achieved a decisive victory, pushing Guthrum and his forces back to their stronghold at Chippenham. The ensuing siege forced Guthrum to negotiate. The resulting Treaty of Wedmore, signed later that year, was a landmark agreement. It formally recognized Viking control over a significant portion of eastern England, an area that would become known as the Danelaw, but crucially secured the independence of Wessex. Guthrum, as part of the treaty, also agreed to be baptized as a Christian, taking Alfred as his godfather. This act, while perhaps a political maneuver, symbolized a truce and the beginning of a complex, often uneasy coexistence. The Danelaw, spanning roughly from the River Thames northwards to the River Tees, represented a profound demographic and cultural shift. Here, Norse law, customs, and language largely prevailed, creating a distinct cultural zone within England. Scandinavian place names, ending in by farm or village, thorp, hamlet, or kirk, church, dotted the landscape, echoing the permanent settlement of Viking families. Archaeological discoveries, from detailed settlement patterns to grave goods, offer vivid insights into these Anglo-Norse communities, revealing a blend of traditions and a shared landscape. Yet even within the Danelaw, the influence was reciprocal. English continued to be spoken, and over time, the two languages began to influence each other, contributing to the rich tapestry of modern English. Legal systems also saw a fascinating fusion. For example, the concept of a wapentake, a subdivision of a shire used in the Danelaw, was a Norse equivalent of the Anglo-Saxon hundred. This was not a simple occupation, but a complex process of cultural absorption and adaptation. While Alfred was forging a new future for Wessex and defining the Danelaw, Viking expansion continued elsewhere across Europe. Raids on the Frankish Empire, a sprawling entity that had fragmented after Charlemagne's death, intensified throughout the 9th century. Paris itself was besieged multiple times, most famously in 885 to 886 AD, when a massive Viking force numbering hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors descended upon the city. The Frankish response was often disjointed, characterized by periods of ransom payments and ineffective military campaigns. These raids, much like those in England, eventually evolved into settlement. The most significant outcome in Francia was the establishment of Normandy in 911 AD, when the Viking leader Rollo was granted land by King Charles the Simple in exchange for defending the mouth of the Seine and converting to Christianity. This region would, in time, produce the formidable Normans, whose impact on England would be felt profoundly 2 centuries later. Ireland, too, became a major arena for Viking activity. From the early 9th century, Norse raiders established strategic longforts, fortified ship encampments along the coast. Dublin, Wexford, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick, among others, began as these Viking strongholds, evolving into thriving urban centers and critical nodes in the vast Viking trade network. Unlike England, where large-scale territorial conquest occurred, The Vikings in Ireland often remained powerful city-states, frequently clashing with the numerous Gaelic kingdoms and each other. They introduced coinage, developed sophisticated maritime economies, and connected Ireland to the wider European and Scandinavian worlds. The archaeological record here is rich with evidence of both conflict and coexistence, revealing intermarriage and cultural exchange between the Norse and the Gaels, even amidst persistent warfare back in England. Alfred's achievements laid the foundation for the reconquest of the Danelaw by his successors. His son, Edward the Elder, and his grandchildren, Athelstan and Edred, systematically pushed back against Norse rule, slowly integrating the Danelaw back into a unified English kingdom. This was a long, arduous process, marked by fierce battles and complex political maneuvering. Athelstan, in particular, is often considered the first true king of England, having decisively defeated a coalition of Norse, Scottish, and Strathclyde Briton forces at the Battle of Brunanbar around 937 AD. This monumental victory cemented Anglo-Saxon dominance and marked a crucial step towards a single English identity. The influence of the Vikings, however, was not easily erased. Their legal traditions, their language, and their commercial prowess left an enduring legacy, profoundly shaping the emergent English nation. The Viking Age, initially defined by terror and plunder, was now evolving into an era of complex settlement, state building, and profound cultural transformation. The fearsome dragon prows that once heralded destruction now brought merchants, settlers, and eventually new rulers. The struggle for dominance in England was far from over, but the seeds of a new, unified Anglo-Saxon identity, forged in the crucible of Viking invasion, had been firmly planted, pointing towards a future where Norse and English destinies would remain intertwined in ways no one could have foreseen. The world was shrinking, interconnected by longships, swords, and the relentless ambition of the Norse peoples. As the dust settled in England after the reconquest of the Danelaw, a new Anglo-Saxon identity began to solidify, yet the wider Viking world was far from static. The same restless spirit and maritime prowess that brought terror to Europe now propelled Norse explorers and settlers to the very edges of the known world and beyond. How did these seemingly relentless raiders transform into nation builders and explorers of new worlds, forever altering the geopolitical landscape from the North Atlantic to the heart of Scandinavia? While Alfred and his successors were forging a unified England, other Norse peoples were embarking on their own epic journeys, driven by a thirst for land, freedom, and the unknown. One of the most remarkable sagas of this era unfolded in the North Atlantic. From the late 9th century, disillusioned Norwegian chieftains and farmers, often fleeing the burgeoning power of kings like Harald Fairhair who sought to unify Norway, set sail west. Their destination, Iceland, a stark, volcanic island previously uninhabited by humans. The settlement of Iceland, beginning around 870 AD, was a monumental undertaking. Families loaded their longships with livestock, tools, provisions, and timber, navigating treacherous seas to establish new lives in a pristine but challenging environment. The Norse brought with them their language, laws, and customs, forging a unique society that, unlike its continental counterparts, developed without a central monarch. Instead, Iceland established the Althing in 930 AD, one of the world's oldest parliamentary assemblies, where chieftains gathered annually to enact laws and settle disputes, a testament to their sophisticated legal traditions. The rich oral traditions preserved in the Icelandic sagas, written down centuries later, provide invaluable insights into the lives, rivalries, and beliefs of these early settlers. They detail not just the hardships of settlement, but also a vibrant, literate culture deeply connected to its ancestral roots. Yet even Iceland, a land of fire and ice, proved to be merely a stepping stone. Around 985 AD, Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, charted a course further west. He discovered and named Greenland, a vast, ice-covered land he shrewdly marketed as a desirable place to settle, despite its formidable conditions. Two main settlements, the eastern and western settlements, were established in the island's southern fjords, supporting a population that at its peak may have numbered several thousand. These communities, sustained by farming, hunting seals and whales, and trading valuable walrus ivory, maintained ties with Norway and Iceland for centuries, a remarkable testament to human endurance and adaptation in an extreme environment. The ultimate frontier, however, lay even further west. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, led an expedition that landed on the shores of North America, a place they called Vinland, the land of wine or pasture land. Archaeological evidence at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirms the existence of a Norse settlement dating to this period. This discovery stands as irrefutable proof of pre-Columbian European contact with the Americas, nearly 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. The Norse at Vinland encountered indigenous peoples, whom they called Skraelings, leading to both trade and conflict. Despite several attempts, the settlements in Vinland were ultimately short-lived, likely due to hostile relations with the native inhabitants, the immense logistical challenges of maintaining distant outposts, and the relatively small population base in Greenland and Iceland. The saga of Vinland highlights the limits of Norse expansion, but it also underscores their incredible capacity for exploration and resilience. While these epic voyages unfolded in the West, a profound transformation was gripping the Scandinavian homelands themselves. The decentralized, chieftain-led societies that had launched the initial raids were gradually consolidating into powerful, unified kingdoms, mirroring the very states they had once plundered. This process was inextricably linked to the arrival and gradual adoption of Christianity. In Denmark, King Gorm the Old, ruling in the early 10th century, laid the groundwork for a unified kingdom. His son, Harald Bluetooth, who reigned from roughly 958 to 986 AD, built upon this foundation, famously claiming to have united Denmark and made the Danes Christian. The magnificent gelling stones, inscribed with runic text and adorned with intricate carvings, serve as monumental testaments to his reign and the conversion of his people. The political advantages of Christianization were clear. It offered a pathway to alliances with powerful Christian kingdoms like the Ottoman Empire in Germany, provided a universal legal and administrative framework, and helped legitimize royal authority by linking it to divine power. Conversion, however, was rarely a simple, immediate event. It was often a top-down process, enforced by kings, and met with resistance from those clinging to the old pagan ways. In Norway, unification was a more protracted and often violent affair. Harald Fairhair is traditionally credited with uniting the petty kingdoms of Norway in the late 9th and early 10th centuries, though this was a long and contested process. Christianity arrived later and more forcefully in Norway. Key figures like Olaf Tryggvason, a former Viking warrior who had converted in England, returned to Norway in 995 AD and aggressively pushed for Christianization, establishing churches and dismantling pagan cults. His efforts, though met with fierce opposition, laid the groundwork for his successor, Olaf II, who reigned from 1015 to 1028 AD. Olaf II, later canonized as Saint Olaf, employed both missionary zeal and military might to enforce Christianity across Norway. His death at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030, fighting to reclaim his throne, transformed him into a martyr and cemented Christianity as the dominant religion in Norway. Sweden's conversion was more gradual and less centralized, with the old gods enduring in pockets for longer, particularly around Uppsala, a major pagan cult center, before Christianity finally took root by the 11th century. The conversion of Scandinavia was not just a religious shift, it ushered in profound cultural changes. Latin literacy brought new administrative practices. Stone churches replaced wooden temples, and new legal codes based on Christian principles began to emerge. The adoption of Christianity also meant Scandinavia was more fully integrated into the political and cultural sphere of medieval Europe, signaling a departure from its outsider status. Just as Scandinavia was evolving, the geopolitical tides in England were turning once more. Towards the end of the 10th century, England found itself under the rule of King Ethelred II, notoriously known as the Unready, a mistranslation of unread, meaning ill-advised. His reign was marked by a disastrous policy of paying Danegeld protection money to Viking raiders, which only served to embolden them. This period saw the rise of a new wave of formidable Danish kings, driven not by the fragmented ambitions of earlier warlords, but by the unified power of the nascent Danish kingdom. Chief among them was Svein Forkbeard, son of Harald Bluetooth. From the 990s, Svein launched devastating campaigns against England, culminating in a full-scale invasion in 1013 AD that forced Ethelred into exile and saw Svein declared King of England. Though Svein died shortly after in 1014, his son, Cnut, would realize the ambition of a truly unified Norse-English realm. After a struggle with Aethelred's returning son, Edmund Ironside, Cnut emerged victorious in 1016, claiming the English throne. Cnut the Great proved to be a formidable and sophisticated ruler. He not only united England and Denmark under his crown, but later gained control of Norway and parts of Sweden, creating a vast North Sea empire that stretched from the British Isles to the Baltic. Cnut ruled as a Christian king, patronizing churches and undertaking a pilgrimage to Rome, where he secured favorable terms for English pilgrims and merchants. His reign marked a peak of Scandinavian power and integration into European politics, demonstrating a complete transformation from the initial shock of Lindisfarne. The Viking identity had morphed from fearsome raider to established monarch, commanding an empire built on both the sword and the cross. Yet the vastness of Cnut's empire, held together by his personal charisma and military might, also contained the seeds of its eventual fragmentation. His death in 1035 initiated a period of instability, with his sons struggling to maintain control, ultimately leading to the dissolution of the North Sea Empire. The stage was now set for the final, dramatic chapters of the Viking Age, where the legacy of Norse expansion would be fully realized in unexpected and enduring ways, leading to events that would fundamentally reshape the future of England and Europe forever. The vast North Sea Empire of Cnut the Great, a monumental testament to transformed Norse ambition, proved tragically ephemeral. Held together by his formidable will and military prowess, it began to unravel almost immediately upon his death in 1035. His successor, Harthacnut, struggled to assert control over the disparate realms, facing challenges in both England and Denmark. The Anglo-Saxon nobility, wary of continued Scandinavian dominance, seized the opportunity to reassert their ancient claim to the throne. This period of dynastic uncertainty plunged England back into political turmoil, a stark reminder of the fragile peace Cnut had imposed. The return of Edward, son of the exiled King Ethelred II, offered a glimmer of hope for a purely Anglo-Saxon restoration. Edward, later known as Edward the Confessor, had spent much of his life in exile in Normandy, a region born from Viking settlement in Francia. This upbringing would inadvertently sow the seeds for England's most profound future upheaval. His ascension to the English throne in 1042, after Harthacnut's sudden death, marked the end of direct Danish rule over England, seemingly closing a turbulent chapter of Norse conquest. However, the influence of the Vikings was now too deeply embedded to simply fade away. Across Scandinavia, the processes of state building continued, driven by the conversion to Christianity and the consolidation of royal power. In Norway, after the death of Saint Olaf, a succession of powerful kings continued to unify the realm. In Denmark, the successors of Cnut, though losing England, maintained a powerful grip on their kingdom and looked with renewed ambition towards the fertile lands across the North Sea. These emerging Scandinavian kingdoms were no longer merely launching opportunistic raids. They were fully fledged European states, albeit with a unique martial heritage. But it was in Normandy, the duchy founded by the Viking Rollo centuries prior, that a new, formidable power was silently brewing. The Norman dukes had adopted French language, culture, and feudalism, yet retained a fierce martial spirit and administrative acumen that echoed their Norse ancestry. They were, in essence, a sophisticated hybrid, poised to play a decisive role in European history. Duke William of Normandy, a shrewd and ruthless leader, believed he held a legitimate claim to the English throne, promised to him by his cousin, Edward the Confessor, and supported by intricate feudal ties. As Edward the Confessor's reign progressed, it became increasingly clear that he would die childless, igniting a fierce succession crisis that would draw in the powerful players of the age. England found itself caught in a web of dynastic claims, with ambitious contenders emerging from both continental Europe and the resurgent Scandinavian kingdoms. The stage was set for a dramatic climax to the Viking Age in the British Isles, a clash of cultures and ambitions that would reshape England forever. By 1066, the political landscape of England was a powder keg. Upon Edward the Confessor's death in January, the Witenagemot, the Anglo-Saxon Council of Powerful Men, elected Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, as their king. Harold was a proven military leader and a man of England, a choice that resonated deeply with the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. However, his ascension immediately triggered challenges from two formidable contenders, each convinced of his own rightful claim to the throne. From the south, William, Duke of Normandy, swiftly prepared an invasion force. He claimed Edward had promised him the throne, and that Harold Godwinson had sworn an oath to support his claim, an oath Harold had allegedly made under duress years earlier. William secured papal blessing for his invasion, casting it as a holy crusade against a perjurer. This gave his enterprise a moral and spiritual legitimacy that was crucial for rallying support and recruits from across northern France. Simultaneously, from the north, a far more direct and devastating challenge emerged from Scandinavia. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, a legendary figure often described as the last great Viking king, also laid claim to the English crown. His claim was based on a pact made decades earlier between Cnut's son Harthacnut and Harold's nephew, Magnus the Good, which stipulated that if either died without an heir, the other would inherit his kingdom. Hardrada, a veteran warrior who had served as a mercenary commander in Kievan Rus and even commanded the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, embodied the classic Viking spirit, ambitious, ruthless, and militarily brilliant. He was not a mere raider but a monarch leading a powerful, unified kingdom, His invasion force was immense, augmented by Tostig Godwinson, Harold's exiled brother who sought revenge and a share of the spoils. This confluence of threats presented Harold Godwinson with an impossible dilemma: defend against two separate, full-scale invasions, arriving almost simultaneously from opposite directions. The year 1066 stands as a brutal and defining moment in English history, a year of unparalleled military upheaval. Harold Godwinson, having established his army in the south to await William's invasion, received news of Hardrada's landing in the north. The Norwegian king and Tostig had sailed up the Humber estuary, overwhelming local resistance and capturing York. Displaying extraordinary resolve and strategic brilliance, Harold Godwinson immediately marched his tired Anglo-Saxon forces over 180 miles north in just a few days, a staggering feat of logistical and human endurance. On September 25, 1066, the Anglo-Saxon army caught Harold Hardrada's forces by surprise at Stamford Bridge. The battle was a bloody and decisive victory for the English. Hardrada, fighting with the ferocity of his ancestors, was killed, alongside Tostig and much of the Norwegian invading force. It was a crushing blow to Scandinavian ambition in England, a symbolic end to the era of large-scale Viking incursions. The last great Viking king had fallen, and with him, the direct lineage of Norse conquest for the English throne was extinguished. But the triumph was short-lived and dearly bought. Just days after the victory at Stamford Bridge, as Harold Godwinson's exhausted army was recovering and reorganizing, news arrived that William of Normandy had landed his invasion fleet at Pevensey Bay in Sussex. The Anglo-Saxon king was forced to undertake another grueling march, this time south, to confront the fresh, well-equipped Norman army. The Battle of Hastings, fought on October 14, 1066, was not merely a battle for a kingdom. It was a clash that would fundamentally redefine England's identity and its place in Europe. Harold Godwinson's weary troops, though fighting with immense bravery and discipline, were ultimately overcome by the Norman cavalry and archers. The death of King Harold on the battlefield sealed the fate of Anglo-Saxon England. William, Duke of Normandy, became William the Conqueror, establishing a new Norman dynasty that would forever alter the language, law, and culture of the land. The Norman conquest, while a victory for a force descended from Vikings, marked the definitive end of the direct Scandinavian influence over the English crown. It was a profound pivot, ushering in an era where England's destiny would be inextricably linked with continental Europe, rather than the North Sea world. The sails of the longships had brought terror, trade, and transformation for nearly 3 centuries. But now, a new chapter was being written, a chapter where the echoes of Viking heritage would resonate not from Scandinavia, but from a powerful new kingdom forging itself on English soil. The entire history of the Viking Age was nearing its final, most dramatic act, one that would redefine the very meaning of power, identity, and empire. The legacy of the Norse, however, was far from over. It had merely found new, unexpected pathways to endure. These events were not simply the conclusion of one era, but the violent birth of another, profoundly shaping the modern world in ways few could have anticipated. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 stands as a monumental dividing line in English history. Yet for the descendants of the Norse, it represented not an ending, but a profound transformation and a renewed assertion of their enduring legacy. How did the fearsome spirit of the Viking longship, now clad in Norman chainmail, continue to reshape not only England but vast swaths of Europe? And what became of the great Scandinavian kingdoms that had once unleashed such terror? The Norman conquest undeniably concluded the direct Scandinavian claim to the English throne, extinguishing the possibility of a renewed North Sea empire. But in its place rose a new, hybrid power, wielded by men whose ancestors had sailed from Scandinavia. William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, established a new English monarchy built on a foundation of feudalism and central authority, a stark contrast to the Anglo-Saxon system it replaced. He was, in essence, a Viking king in Frankish guise, his ruthless ambition and military brilliance echoing the very qualities that had defined his Norse forebears. The transformation of England under Norman rule was swift and profound. French became the language of the court, law, and administration, fundamentally altering the English language over centuries, creating the rich, complex tapestry of modern English. Thousands of French words flowed into the vocabulary, particularly those relating to government, justice, and nobility, while Old English evolved. Architecturally, wooden Anglo-Saxon halls gave way to monumental stone castles and cathedrals, symbols of Norman power and the Romanesque style, projecting permanence. William's Domesday Book of 1085, an unprecedented survey of land and resources, showcased Norman commitment to efficient administration and control, providing the crown with unparalleled understanding of its assets and tax potential. This meticulous record-keeping, a powerful tool for consolidating power and extracting wealth, marked a significant departure from previous Anglo-Saxon methods. Economically, England was reoriented, with new trade links to continental Europe, particularly Normandy. The legal system underwent a profound overhaul, moving from customary laws to a more centralized, codified system, laying the groundwork for English common law. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was systematically suppressed, replaced by a Norman elite holding lands directly from the king, reinforcing feudal structure. This was not merely a change of dynasty. It was a societal revolution, profoundly shaping England's identity for centuries yet. The outward thrust of Norman ambition was not confined to England. Simultaneously, another branch of these resourceful descendants of Vikings carved out a powerful realm in the Mediterranean. From the early 11th century, Norman adventurers and mercenaries, drawn by the promise of land and riches, established a formidable presence in southern Italy. Figures like Robert Guiscard and his brother Roger solidified control over Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily, eventually creating the powerful Kingdom of Sicily by 1130. This new kingdom, a unique blend of Norman, Byzantine, Lombard, and Arab cultures, became a thriving center of learning and trade. Its Norman kings, like Roger II, were renowned for administrative efficiency, patronage of arts and sciences, and tolerance of diverse groups, creating a unique cultural synthesis. Architectural achievements, such as the mosaics of Monreal and Cefalù, fused Byzantine artistry with Norman grandeur, showcasing dynamic cultural exchange. This Mediterranean expansion demonstrated the enduring martial spirit, administrative skill, and adaptive capacity, tracing its lineage back to the Norse settlers of Normandy, proving the drive for conquest and settlement had merely found new expressions while the Normans were forging new empires. The Scandinavian homelands themselves were undergoing a quieter, yet equally profound, transformation. The era of widespread, pagan-led raiding had decisively passed. By the 12th century, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden had fully emerged as distinct, centralized Christian kingdoms, deeply integrated into the political and religious fabric of Latin Christendom. The conversion process, often protracted and sometimes violent, had finally cemented Christianity as the dominant faith, bringing with it new cultural norms, monastic traditions, and legal systems. The old chieftain-based societies, with their emphasis on individual honor and local power, had largely given way to powerful monarchies supported by a burgeoning ecclesiastical structure. Kings now drew their legitimacy not from pagan gods or clan loyalties, but from divine right, sanctioned by the church. The Scandinavian kingdoms now directed their energies inward, focusing on internal development, agricultural expansion, and the consolidation of royal authority. New towns grew up around royal administrative centers and burgeoning trade hubs. Bergen in Norway, for instance, became a vital Hanseatic port, connecting Scandinavia to the vast mercantile networks of Northern Europe. Visby on Gotland, Sweden, also flourished as a key trading center in the Baltic. While the longship remained a crucial vessel for trade and royal navies, its role as a terror-inducing instrument of plunder had diminished. Warfare continued, but it was now largely between Christian kings, fought with more conventional European armies and strategies, rather than the rapid, amphibious assaults of earlier centuries. Iceland and Greenland, those far-flung outposts of Norse exploration, maintained their unique cultural trajectories. Iceland, in particular, remained a bastion of Old Norse language and traditions, meticulously preserving the saga's epic prose narratives that offer unparalleled insights into the Viking Age, its heroes, and its cosmology. These sagas, written down in the 13th and 14th centuries, became invaluable windows into a world that was rapidly fading from memory on the European continent. Greenland, however, faced harsher realities. Its Norse settlements, isolated and struggling with a changing climate and dwindling resources, slowly declined over the late medieval period. Contact with Norway became sporadic, and by the early 15th century, the Greenlandic Norse communities had vanished, leaving behind only their ruins as a poignant reminder of the limits of human endurance and the fragility of distant settlements. The once thriving North Atlantic world of the Vikings, stretching from Norway to Vinland, had contracted, leaving only Iceland as its most enduring cultural heir. The Viking Age, as a distinct historical period defined by Scandinavian expansion and pagan identity, is conventionally understood to have ended by the mid-11th or early 12th century. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, often cited as a symbolic closing chapter for Viking military ambitions in England, effectively marked the end of large-scale, state-sponsored Norse attempts to conquer territories in the British Isles. The conversion of the Scandinavian homelands to Christianity, the consolidation of royal power, and their integration into the broader European political system meant that the defining characteristics of the early Viking era, paganism, decentralized leadership, and opportunistic raiding, had largely receded. The Norse were no longer outsiders, assaulting Christian Europe. They were now active, if sometimes still aggressive, participants in its evolving medieval landscape. The dragon-headed longships, once symbols of terror, were by now primarily tools of trade or royal navies. Yet, to say the Viking Age ended is not to say that its influence disappeared. Far from it. The legal, linguistic, and cultural legacies continued to permeate the societies they had interacted with. Hundreds of English words, from sky and anger to husband and window, bear the imprint of Old Norse. Legal concepts, administrative divisions, and place names across the Danelaw and beyond remain as tangible reminders of centuries of Norse settlement. In Ireland, the foundational urban centers established by the Vikings continued to thrive, their street plans and economic networks still echoing their Norse origins. In Russia, the foundational role of the Rus, a group of Norse traders and warriors in the formation of the Kievan Rus state, cemented a lasting influence on Eastern European identity and political structures. The Viking spirit of exploration, conquest, and adaptation, while no longer defined by the pagan raids of the 9th century, had indelibly shaped the course of European history. It had led to the creation of new kingdoms, influenced the development of languages, and expanded the geographical horizons of the medieval world in ways that continue to resonate. The age of the longship had passed, but its wake was still spreading, ensuring that the legacy of the Norse would be felt for millennia to come, setting the stage for understanding how these transformative centuries continue to speak to us today. The enduring fascination with this era is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a recognition of how a relatively small group of innovative and ambitious peoples could leave such an outsized mark on global civilization, prompting us to ask what lessons their story holds for our own interconnected world. What lessons, indeed, does the sprawling, complex tapestry of the Viking Age hold for us today, centuries after the last longship sailed on a campaign of conquest? Beyond the epic sagas and the archaeological treasures, how has this transformative era indelibly stamped itself on our language, our laws, our very genetic makeup, and even our modern global consciousness? The echoes of the Norse are not confined to dusty history books. They resonate in the everyday, subtly shaping the world we inhabit. One of the most profound and often overlooked legacies of the Viking Age lies within the English language itself. Imagine navigating a conversation without words like sky, anger, husband, window, leg, skull, take, give, call, want, or even they, them, and their. These are but a handful of the hundreds of words and grammatical structures that owe their existence to the prolonged contact between Old Norse and Old English in the Danelaw and other Norse-settled regions of Britain. The linguistic fusion was not merely a superficial borrowing, it was a deep, structural intermingling. Old Norse contributed a clarity and directness, enriching English vocabulary and simplifying its complex grammatical inflections, a process that began to bridge the gap between Anglo-Saxon and what would eventually become Middle English. This linguistic legacy is a testament to the intimate, sustained interaction between Norse settlers and Anglo-Saxons, even amidst conflict, forming the very bedrock of our common tongue. Beyond words, the Vikings left their mark on the legal landscape. While the Norman conquest brought French legal concepts, the preceding centuries of Norse settlement in the Danelaw introduced or reinforced certain legal practices that proved remarkably resilient. The concept of the wapentake, for instance, a territorial division and administrative assembly equivalent to the Anglo-Saxon hundred, persisted in regions of northern England for centuries, a direct import from Norse custom. More subtly, some historians argue that the Norse emphasis on communal justice and the role of assemblies in lawmaking, as seen in the Icelandic Althing, may have contributed to the evolution of local self-governance and even elements of jury trials, though the development of the jury system is a complex, multifaceted process. The very idea of an oath-sworn assembly to settle disputes was familiar in both cultures, allowing for a degree of legal syncretism that endured long after direct Norse rule ended. The physical landscape itself offers a palpable testament to Norse presence. Travel through regions of northern and eastern England, particularly Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and East Anglia, and you will encounter an abundance of place names directly derived from Old Norse. Settlements ending in by meaning farm or village, such as Whitby, Grimsby, and Derby. Thorpe meaning hamlet or outlying farm, like Scunthorpe and Oscathorpe. Kirk meaning church, such as Kirkwall, and Toft meaning homestead, such as Lowestoft. The map. These names are not merely historical curiosities. They are linguistic fossils, mapping the very pattern of Norse settlement, and reminding us of a time when these areas spoke a distinctly Scandinavian dialect of English. Archaeological excavations beneath many of these modern towns continue to unearth evidence of thriving Norse communities, from residential structures and craft workshops to burial sites and everyday artifacts, painting a vivid picture of these integrated Anglo-Norse societies. Modern science has added another layer to this understanding: the genetic legacy. Advances in DNA analysis have revealed that populations in regions with heavy Viking settlement, particularly in Britain, Ireland, and across the North Atlantic, show significant genetic contributions from Scandinavian ancestors. Studies have identified distinct genetic markers, indicating male line ancestry from Norway and Denmark, particularly prevalent in areas of the Danelaw, the Scottish Isles, and Eastern Ireland. This genetic footprint underscores the scale of Norse migration and settlement, suggesting that these were not just transient raiding parties, but families who came to settle, intermarry, and integrate into existing populations, leaving a biological heritage that persists to this day. It provides a powerful, tangible link to an era often perceived as distant. The economic and commercial innovations introduced by the Vikings also left an enduring mark. Their vast trade networks, stretching from the Baltic Sea through Russia to Byzantium and across the North Atlantic, effectively reconnected fragmented post-Roman Europe. They facilitated the exchange of goods: furs, amber, slaves, silver, silks and spices, and crucially ideas. The establishment of urban centers like Dublin, York, Jorvik, and Novgorod were not just strategic military outposts, but vibrant hubs of commerce and craft. These cities became crucial nodes in a re-emerging European economy, demonstrating the Norse capacity for shrewd mercantilism alongside their martial prowess. Many of these foundational urban cores continue to thrive for centuries, their layouts and commercial importance echoing their Viking origins, laying groundwork for later medieval trade. Perhaps one of the most compelling aspects of the Viking legacy is its profound impact on the human imagination, especially in the modern era. For centuries after their age, the Vikings were largely demonized in Christian European chronicles, portrayed as brutal pagan destroyers. However, the 19th century witnessed a dramatic shift in perception, fueled by romantic nationalism in Scandinavia and broader European interest in ancient myths and heroic sagas. The Viking revival re-envisioned them as noble, intrepid explorers, skilled craftsmen, and courageous warriors, a powerful, albeit often romanticized, counter-narrative. This shift was largely driven by the rediscovery and popularization of the Icelandic sagas and Eddas, which presented a rich literary tradition of Norse mythology, poetry, and history from an internal perspective. Today, this fascination continues unabated, perhaps even intensified. From blockbuster films and television series to video games, literature, and even popular music, the Viking Age maintains an unparalleled grip on popular culture. This contemporary interest is not just about entertainment. It reflects a deeper human connection to themes of exploration, resilience, cultural encounter, and identity. Modern archaeology and historical scholarship, armed with new scientific techniques like isotope analysis, dendrochronology, and sophisticated DNA studies, are continuously refining our understanding, moving beyond both the medieval caricatures and the 19th century romanticism to present a far more nuanced and complex picture. We now see them as farmers, traders, artists, and lawmakers, as well as warriors and raiders, understanding the intricate web of motivations and innovations that define their age. This ongoing reevaluation highlights a central lesson of the Viking Age: the fluidity of identity and the dynamic nature of cultural interaction. The Viking was not a static entity, but an evolving concept, adapting and transforming as Norse peoples interacted with diverse societies across vast geographical spans. They were both agents of destruction and catalysts for change, facilitating unprecedented cultural exchange, expanding geographical horizons, and laying the foundations for new political and social orders. Their story reminds us that history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous, interconnected narrative where past actions have ripple effects that shape present realities. The Viking Age, far from being a closed chapter, continues to inform our understanding of migration, cultural assimilation, the rise and fall of empires, and the enduring human drive for exploration and innovation. It challenges us to look beyond simplistic narratives and embrace the complexity of our shared human story. And as we continue to unearth new evidence and reinterpret old texts, the entire history of the Viking Age continues to reveal itself, inviting us to delve deeper into its profound and lasting impact on the world. What lessons, indeed, does the sprawling, complex tapestry of the Viking Age hold for us today, centuries after the last longship sailed on a campaign of conquest? Beyond the epic sagas and the archaeological treasures, how has this transformative era indelibly stamped itself on our language, our laws, our very genetic makeup, and even our modern global consciousness? The echoes of the Norse are not confined to dusty history books. They resonate in the everyday, subtly shaping the world we inhabit. One of the most profound and often overlooked legacies of the Viking Age lies within the English language itself. Imagine navigating a conversation without words like sky, anger, husband, window, leg, skull, take, give, call, want, or even they, them, and their. These are but a handful of the hundreds of words and grammatical structures that owe their existence to the prolonged contact between Old Norse and Old English in the Danelaw and other Norse-settled regions of Britain. The linguistic fusion was not merely a superficial borrowing, it was a deep, structural intermingling. Old Norse contributed a clarity and directness, enriching English vocabulary and simplifying its complex grammatical inflections, a process that began to bridge the gap between Anglo-Saxon and what would eventually become Middle English. This linguistic legacy is a testament to the intimate, sustained interaction between Norse settlers and Anglo-Saxons, even amidst conflict, forming the very bedrock of our common tongue. Beyond words, the Vikings left their mark on the legal landscape. While the Norman conquest brought French legal concepts, the preceding centuries of Norse settlement in the Danelaw introduced or reinforced certain legal practices that proved remarkably resilient. The concept of the wapentake, for instance, a territorial division and administrative assembly equivalent to the Anglo-Saxon hundred, persisted in regions of northern England for centuries, a direct import from Norse custom. More subtly, some historians argue that the Norse emphasis on communal justice and the role of assemblies in lawmaking, as seen in the Icelandic Althing, may have contributed to the evolution of local self-governance and even elements of jury trials, though the development of the jury system is a complex, multifaceted process. The very idea of an oath-sworn assembly to settle disputes was familiar in both cultures, allowing for a degree of legal syncretism that endured long after direct Norse rule ended. The physical landscape itself offers a palpable testament to Norse presence. Travel through regions of northern and eastern England, particularly Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and East Anglia, and you will encounter an abundance of place names directly derived from Old Norse. Settlements ending in by meaning farm or village, such as Whitby, Grimsby, and Derby. Thorpe meaning hamlet or outlying farm, like Scunthorpe and Oscathorpe. Kirk meaning church, such as Kirkwall, and Toft meaning homestead, such as Lowestoft. The map. These names are not merely historical curiosities. They are linguistic fossils, mapping the very pattern of Norse settlement and reminding us of a time when these areas spoke a distinctly Scandinavian dialect of English. Archaeological excavations beneath many of these modern towns continue to unearth evidence of thriving Norse communities, from residential structures and craft workshops to burial sites and everyday artifacts, painting a vivid picture of these integrated Anglo-Norse societies. Modern science has added another layer to this understanding: the genetic legacy. Advances in DNA analysis have revealed that populations in regions with heavy Viking settlement, particularly in Britain, Ireland, and across the North Atlantic, show significant genetic contributions from Scandinavian ancestors. Studies have identified distinct genetic markers, indicating male line ancestry from Norway and Denmark, particularly prevalent in areas of the Danelaw, the Scottish Isles, and Eastern Ireland. This genetic footprint underscores the scale of Norse migration and settlement, suggesting that these were not just transient raiding parties, but families who came to settle, intermarry, and integrate into existing populations, leaving a biological heritage that persists to this day. It provides a powerful, tangible link to an era often perceived as distant. The economic and commercial innovations introduced by the Vikings also left an enduring mark. Their vast trade networks, stretching from the Baltic Sea through Russia to Byzantium and across the North Atlantic, effectively reconnected fragmented post-Roman Europe. They facilitated the exchange of goods: furs, amber, slaves, silver, silks and spices, and crucially ideas. The establishment of urban centers like Dublin, York, Jorvik, and Novgorod were not just strategic military outposts, but vibrant hubs of commerce and craft. These cities became crucial nodes in a re-emerging European economy, demonstrating the Norse capacity for shrewd mercantilism alongside their martial prowess. Many of these foundational urban cores continue to thrive for centuries, their layouts and commercial importance echoing their Viking origins, laying groundwork for later medieval trade. Perhaps one of the most compelling aspects of the Viking legacy is its profound impact on the human imagination, especially in the modern era. For centuries after their age, the Vikings were largely demonized in Christian European chronicles, portrayed as brutal pagan destroyers. However, the 19th century witnessed a dramatic shift in perception, fueled by Romantic nationalism in Scandinavia and broader European interest in ancient myths and heroic sagas. The Viking revival re-envisioned them as noble, intrepid explorers, skilled craftsmen, and courageous warriors, a powerful, albeit often romanticized, counter-narrative. This shift was largely driven by the rediscovery and popularization of the Icelandic sagas and Eddas, which presented a rich literary tradition of Norse mythology, poetry, and history from an internal perspective. Today, this fascination continues unabated, perhaps even intensified. From blockbuster films and television series to video games, literature, and even popular music, the Viking Age maintains an unparalleled grip on popular culture. This contemporary interest is not just about entertainment. It reflects a deeper human connection to themes of exploration, resilience, cultural encounter, and identity. Modern archaeology and historical scholarship, armed with new scientific techniques like isotope analysis, dendrochronology, and sophisticated DNA studies, are continuously refining our understanding, moving beyond both the medieval caricatures and the 19th century romanticism to present a far more nuanced and complex picture. We now see them as farmers, traders, artists, and lawmakers, as well as warriors and raiders, understanding the intricate web of motivations and innovations that define their age. This ongoing reevaluation highlights a central lesson of the Viking Age. the fluidity of identity, and the dynamic nature of cultural interaction. The Viking was not a static entity, but an evolving concept, adapting and transforming as Norse peoples interacted with diverse societies across vast geographical spans. They were both agents of destruction and catalysts for change, facilitating unprecedented cultural exchange, expanding geographical horizons, and laying the foundations for new political and social orders. Their story reminds us that history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous, interconnected narrative where past actions have ripple effects that shape present realities. The Viking Age, far from being a closed chapter, continues to inform our understanding of migration, cultural assimilation, the rise and fall of empires, and the enduring human drive for exploration and innovation. It challenges us to look beyond simplistic narratives and embrace the complexity of our shared human story. And as we continue to unearth new evidence and reinterpret old texts, the entire history of the Viking Age continues to reveal itself, inviting us to delve deeper into its profound and lasting impact on the world.